Hello again, lovely people. This week we are back with potentially the 8th installment of Book Chat. We've done a couple by now. I might have lost track, but I hope you're enjoying them as much as I am.
Sophie Vlogs.
We're going to start with books that were lent to me by some lovely people. First up we have The Art of War by Sun Tzu. This is one of those books which I've meant to read for ages, and it's really, really tiny, and it takes no time at all, but at the same time, it's super interesting. Like, there is never a situation in which I'm really gonna need to know, like, the best strategies for war. And yet, it's split into 13 sections. It's very concise, but I feel like as you read it, you sort of understand why Sun Tzu was such, like, a great general, because you're like, hey, these are some very logical and simple, yet easy to forget things. So that was cool. The second book is a completely different genre, and that is Mad About the Boy by Helen Fielding, which is the third of the Bridget Jones books. I've read the first Bridget Jones book, watched 2 of the films, and not read the second Bridget Jones book. But, like, that's enough, like, base knowledge for me to be able to, like, just go into this book and be fine with it. I know when it came out there was a lot of controversy, which was to do with the decision to get rid of a certain character. Look at me, trying to be spoiler free, when we all know what I'm talking about because it was everywhere. I'll be honest, it didn't bother me that said character was no longer in the book. Like, I enjoyed seeing Bridget in a different time of her life. It's not the best book I've ever read by any means, but it was perfectly enjoyable as just like a light frippery. I feel like if you're maybe like much more emotionally invested in Bridget and her life and her journey, then I can kind of see why a lot of people were really disappointed. And I will say it wasn't the most grabbing of books, but for what it is, I enjoyed it. It still annoys me that she's like still so obsessed with like dieting and gaining and losing weight and all that sort of stuff, just because I never am interested in reading about that, ever. But it was kind of cool seeing Bridget as a mum. Over there. I think I went in with low expectations, so I perfectly enjoyed it. Those are my thoughts on that one. After that, we have... Oh, I don't even know if these are the right way around. Death Note. All of them. In lovely little black editions. Ooh, the pages are black. Ooh, isn't it cool? Yes, it is. I watched the anime of Death Note years ago now. Thoroughly enjoyed it. One of my favourite anime. I'm not really a super big anime watcher, but I have seen some, and that was one of my favourite ones. So in my time, the Netflix Death Note thing has just been announced that they're setting it in America, which I'm not thrilled about, not gonna lie to you there. I think that takes away a lot of the core of what this series is. I don't really understand the casting decisions or the location decisions. It all seems like a load of shit to me. Those are just my opinions. However, I have wanted to read the manga of it for a while, and some lovely person sent them all to me after they read them, which was super, super lovely. And it was great. There were bits which I'd forgotten happened, and I don't know if that's because they were not such a big deal in the series, or if it's just I forgot that they happened. If you haven't experienced it, Death Note is about this guy called Light who is a teenager in Japan, and in this world shinigami are death gods, and they have death notes where if you write someone's name into it, that person dies. So this shinigami is really bored, and he drops his death note down to earth, and then Light picks it up and decides to start dispensing justice and killing criminals and all stuff like this, and he goes by the name of Kira in that thing. So it's this whole massive thing about Light and what lengths Light will go to continue being Kira, that sort of thing. There's also like a task force that's trying to find out who Kira is, which like the head of is like dad. There's this mysterious detective called Elle who is like helping the task force trying to discover who Kira is. So many threads. I really enjoyed rereading it and remembering how they all come together again in the end. There were definitely bits of it which I felt were a lot slower than the rest of it. So there were like some of the volumes were less good than others because they had like big tangents and stuff like that. But on the whole, great series. Really enjoyed it. Again, it was super good. After that was The Dress Shop of Dreams by Mena van Praag. I've mentioned her a couple of times because I have essentially all the books she's written to work my way through. This is the third of hers that I've read, and I still like the first one the best, and then I like this one, I think, the least out of the three, even though I still liked it and enjoyed it. This okay, so the dress shop of dreams is a woman who runs this dress shop, and then people come in and they're like drawn in, and they put on this dress, and the woman does like a little stitch on it to like pin it to them, and then like that little bit of magic like helps them solve the problems they need to solve, become the person they need to be, all of it, like discover themselves, that sort of thing, which in theory I like. This has, well, okay, it's very hard to discuss the reasons that I didn't like this as much without just like giving everything away. Someone does some things in this book which the consequences that they then have to face are not as bad as I think they should be. I'm gonna leave that there. There's also a thing I feel a little bit uncomfortable with, which is this whole like magic then causing people to like have relationships and stuff. And this doesn't go so far as to be, you know, like love potions, that takes away consent. This doesn't go so far as to do that, except for one moment which I feel very iffy about. That probably made no sense. There's a whole like magic free will thing, which I find a little bit like I don't really know how to navigate with these books, because I think they're supposed to be really light and frivolous, and I'm not supposed to think about it that much, but I can't help but think about it that much. So suffice to say, if you like books that are sweet, magical, romancy type things, I would still say go for The House at the End of Hope Street, because it's the best one I've read so far. Although The Witches of Cambridge, also super good. This was good, I just have niggles. Next up is a book that I ordinarily would not have read, but I read it because my dad lent it to me, and that is Icebreaker by John Gardner, which is a James Bond book. I've never read any of the Ian Fleming James Bonds. I like the films, I haven't seen the newest ones. I'm being a bit rubbish as a Bond fan. So the premise of this one is, there is a organisation which is like anti-communism, essentially. They're kind of Nazis. And they keep doing all these like organised hits on people. In response to this threat, James Bond has to work with a guy from the KGB, a guy from the CIA, and a woman from Mossad. And they sort of have to try to put aside all of their mistrust of each other and work together to like bring this terrorist faction to justice. And there's a whole like, the guy who's in charge of it all is like a ex-Nazi guy, and he's trying to bring around the Fourth Reich and all stuff like this. Like, as an action-y James Bond book, it was fine. I don't read a lot of action books, so it already wasn't massively my cup of tea. And then I felt like some of the characterization was a bit clumsy, or just a bit obvious. So, you know when you go into a text like this, like, someone will turn out to not be who they say they are, and there might be a betrayal, and like I really feel like I saw those coming. But it was fine. If you like James Bond, if you want to read some more James Bondy stuff, it's perfectly fine. I just didn't think it was great. The final book we're going to talk about this week is Dragonspell, which is the fourth volume of the Epic Devilry series by Catherine Kerr. I read the first 3 books in this series over a year ago. I really liked the first 2, and then the third one had a storyline that pissed me right off. And I was too annoyed about it to be able to continue with the series, so I put it to one side, and I told myself I would pick it up at a later date, and I did. I don't want to give spoilers. This will be spoiler-free for the series. I will just say there is one of the main characters is a woman. There is a storyline in the third book which I felt was unnecessary, and it annoys me that in a good fantasy series we can't just have a woman exist without being subject to some sort of gendered violence type thing. That's all I'll say on that matter. This one was better than the third one, but is not as good as the first 2, in my opinion. Mainly because I was really super enjoying it, actually. I was like reminded of why I liked the series. And then we got near the end, and I felt like we'd been building to this clash between these 2 big figures, and I felt like it was so anticlimactic. And the same thing happened again with like the end. I also felt like that was really anticlimactic. I do really like where our main female character, Jill, ends up by the end of this. I was super okay with that. But the rest of it I did enjoy. If you're not familiar with Catherine Kerr and the Devery cycle, it's very interesting as an idea. I really like the concept of it. Okay, it has like a cyclical narrative whereby all of these souls are continuously, each time they die, they're reborn, and they're all going through the cycle each time together, but in different relations to each other and in different situations each time. And this one guy, because he fucked up a while ago and has to make amends for that, doesn't die. So he's like the continuous thread throughout all these stories, and then you have all of these mini cycles that are happening with the same souls but in different people and with different relations to each other, if that makes sense. So there's like a flashback narrative whereby it's the same soul but they are different people, if that doesn't sound too confusing. So whilst this was the concluding chapter of this series, the 4-book series, it is part of a larger cycle of books whereby the macro story, if you will, continues throughout all of them, whereas this is like the micro story has been resolved. The whole reason I have these books in the first place is because my dad used to buy them for me when I was a kid. So I have read some of them before, and this was part of my choice to like reread them, because I figured out there's essentially like 4 main cycles in the massive series. So this is the end of cycle 1, which I've now read. I have cycle 3 and 4, but I do not have cycle 2, which will explain how when I tried to read them when I was a child and I started on cycle 3, it was a little bit more confusing than it should have been. So my plan is at some point to source the cycle 2 series of books, either on Kindle or secondhand, that sort of thing, read them, then I can continue with them, and hopefully what I have already read will make more sense to me, because it's already making more sense to me than it did previously, but I know there's some connecting stuff that I just haven't read yet. That's pretty much the end of this chapter of Book Chat. Those are just the things that I've read since I last filmed one of these. As per usual, if you've read them, give me thoughts. If you have read just cool stuff, give me thoughts on that. Let's have a chat. Let's chat about some books. You know the drill. I don't have to keep doing this every time. You know where we're at. I hope you're having a really lovely day, and I will see you next week.